The trial of Stephen McCullagh for the murder of 32-year-old Natalie McNally has entered its second week. Today in court, a transcript was read out of McCullagh's first interview with police, where he said Natalie was, quote, having problems with her ex. Ms McNally was killed at her home in Lurgan, suffering fatal injuries in what has been described as a prolonged attack. McCullagh, who's 36 years old, denies murdering Ms McNally, who was 15 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. Footage tracing the journey of a person of interest from the street in Lisburn where McCullagh lived to the Lurgan street where Natalie McNally lived was shown to the court last week. I'm Niamh Campbell and I'm joined by Allison Morris, who is following the trial today. Allison, you're very welcome to the Bell Tell. I know you have been covering this trial since its beginning, and the last time we visited the trial was on Wednesday last week. So what else was shown in court last week?
We got through quite a lot. I suppose the big evidence last week was the details of Natalie's injuries, and then we moved on to hearing from some cyber police officers who went through the so-called live streamer that YouTuber Stephen McCullagh said he was playing on the Sunday night, the 18th of December 2022, the night when Natalie was murdered. He had originally told police that he was live streaming during that time, and then that later changed when it became apparent that that live stream had been pre-recorded some days before.
And Allison, the evidence began today with a police officer reenacting the steps that the person of interest took on the night of Natalie McNally's murder. Can you talk us through that and what happened?
Yeah, so there is various different pieces of CCTV. It included some CCTV from inside a bus, a translink bus. It included some ring doorbells. It included CCTV from outside police stations. And then it was shown also CCTV in Lurgan Town Centre in and around a bar where they claim that this person of interest gets into a taxi. And that taxi is then asked to go to Lisburn, quite close to where McCullagh lives. So all of this was shown to the jury, albeit some of it isn't very clear. It's late at night. So there is quite a lot of CCTV, but it was, as you know, it was like a December night, it was dark. But this morning there was a packed morning of evidence this morning, Monday morning, and that started with the jury being shown a recording made by a police officer who walked the journey that the prosecution claim McCullagh did the day Natalie was murdered. So what they say is that McCullagh got on a bus from Dunmurry, outside Dunmurry Police Station, and we've seen the jury have already been shown CCTV from there and from inside the Translink bus. And they then say that he got off the bus and walked to Natalie's house in Silverwood Green from Lurgan City Centre. So a police officer videoed that and retraced the steps that the prosecution say that he took, and that was a journey of around 30 minutes, and that was shown. Now the prosecution speeded that up in double time for a lot of that, but that was shown to the jury, and there were also pointed out areas of cameras which caught this person on this journey on the night that Natalie was murdered. As we know, Stephen McCullagh denies murdering Natalie, hence the fact that we're in the second week of a jury trial. So today the jury started with being shown, look, this is the journey in daylight and this is how long it would take to make that journey, and that is why a police officer filmed that. So that's how the evidence started today. And then, as I said, there was a lot packed into a very packed morning. And then we heard from the detective inspector who's in charge of the murder case, and that's Niamh McGuinness. Niamh McGuinness took the witness stand not to give evidence, but to read from a transcript of a police interview. Stephen McCullagh arrives at Natalie's home in Lurgan on Monday the 19th. He claims he hadn't heard from her all day. He thought she was angry at him because he'd been drinking on the live stream that he'd played the night before, and he'd promised he wouldn't drink because she was pregnant. And he then arrives down at her house, discovers her body, rings 999. We've already heard the 999 call, and we've heard everything else that came along with that. But what we hadn't heard until this point was what he said in an interview. So he's arrested at the scene and he's questioned in Musgrave Street Station in Belfast on December the 20th. So he's arrested on the Monday the 19th. He's questioned on December the 20th. And this is the first time that we hear what he told detectives during that time. So just to let people know here, listen to this, we don't see it. We don't see the footage and we don't hear his voice. What happened instead was a prosecution barrister read out what McCullagh said in response, and Niamh McGuinness read out what police asked him. And we also heard on occasions would say the solicitor has said So during the majority of his interview, he made a no comment interview. So that was on the advice of his solicitor. And he made no comment to really mundane questions, like what were you doing on Sunday? How long have you been going with her? What's the nature of your relationship? Does she have PIN codes on her phones? There was all sorts of questions asked. He just said no comment to all of them. But then he was asked in relation to, was Natalie having any problems with any people or any persons? And that was on the advice of a solicitor. He responded and said that she was having problems with her ex. He told detectives he didn't know the name of this ex partner, that they had been broken up for about 9 months. But he did say that he had emailed her a bunch of abuse, I think was his words, the exact words he used, around the end of August, start of September sometime. He said he was calling her using a private number, so she had his number blocked, but he was phoning her from a private number, and she answered this because she thought it might be an emergency or a work call. He said that while, again, she had that number blocked, she was also receiving emails. And he said that he's seen one of these emails where he was listing some of the things that, in his mind, as in the person who sent the email, thought were negative flaws. He said there was also some sectarianism in those emails, even though he said Natalie swore blind that she was not religious at all. And that was the only time he asked then was asked about Natalie's dog River and would that dog react if a stranger came into the house. And then he at the stage reverted back to the no comment for the rest of the questions.
And see as well, Alison, just in terms of CCTV footage that I believe was shown last week, it actually did show what can be confirmed to be Natalie McNally in her last hours.
So what we do know was on the Saturday night before Natalie was killed, she stayed overnight in Stephen McCullagh's house in Lisburn. She stayed there until about 1 o'clock, and there is CCTV of her car driving away and him standing at the end of his path as her car drives away, and that was at about 1 o'clock on the Sunday. We do know then that Stephen McCullagh did go to the off licence. He bought alcohol, and there was CCTV of that. There was also receipts of the alcohol that he bought. There was also receipts shown to the jury of two games that he had purchased in a gaming shop in Lisburn, and one of them was Grand Theft Auto Vice City, the game that he was playing. Then he said he was live streaming on the evening that Natalie was killed. But right up until now, we hadn't really heard what the defence case was going to be, and today we got a sort of glimpse of that when we hear Steve McCullagh introducing in response to questions by police that Natalie was having issues with an ex-partner.
Today, on Monday, 2nd of March, Alison, in court, there was a timeline Word document showed to the court which mentioned Stephen McCullagh's live stream alibi. Can you talk to us a bit about what was in that?
Yeah, so when Stephen McCullagh was arrested at the scene, he was questioned the next day and then he was released. And within a few days, the police told his solicitor he was no longer a suspect. So it would be another few weeks before then he was rearrested. And at this time, devices were taken from his home. And on one of those devices was a Word document that had put in place a timeline of events that started on the Sunday morning. So he spoke about how that he woke up, that he went to the local Spar to get breakfast for himself and Natalie. Remember, she had stayed overnight in his house on the Saturday night. He said he had left her at home in his house in bed with her dog. He had gone to get some breakfast. Then he spoke about coming back. She left at 1 o'clock. She was going home. She had a shower and then she went round to her parents' house where she had dinner and watched it was the World Cup final. And a lot of people remember that night quite clearly. So she's messaging him. He says that she has messaged him mainly about football during this time, and he's responding to her. And then he says that at 4 o'clock, he posts the advertisement on his social media pages for the live stream that he said he was going to be doing later on that evening. And then in this Word document, he says, started the Christmas special stream at 6 p.m., played Grand Theft Auto Vice City and Robot Wars. He says he took breaks to go to the bathroom to smoke cigarettes and he drank 3 pints of Guinness and some Baileys during this. And he described his day the next day. So the prosecution case is that he was not live streaming and that he instead left his home when he claimed that he had been at home all night and he went to Lurgan, and that was where we get the CCTV. But he then describes the next day as if he had live streamed and he had woke up the next morning, and he describes that, and he again talks about a very mundane sort of day, and he says he watches Planes, Trains and Automobiles, the film. He also says he finishes filming a Star Wars review. He was a YouTuber who would have reviewed, Star Wars memorabilia and that sort of sci-fi stuff, and he says he records one of those. He messages Natalie throughout the day. She doesn't respond. He then messages his friend because he thinks Natalie's angry at him. And then he states how he started work at 6. And when he finished work, then he drove to Lurgan, and he says that he came to the door. He knocked on the door, no one answered. The door then was unlocked. And he describes then seeing Natalie lying between the hallway and the living room and door entrance of her house. He says there is blood everywhere. He describes how her head was in the dog bowl and she was cold to the touch and her lips were blue. He rings 999, and then he talks about how the ambulance operator ran me through CPR. And we've already heard that because in one of the first days evidence we heard the call to the 999 call operator where she then instructed him to do CPR until the ambulance arrived. So that was the conclusion of this Word document. But then after this, we did hear another police officer was placed into the witness stand, and McCullagh's defence question said, "You are aware that he is a YouTuber, or what would be described in sort of modern speak as a content creator, and you are aware that content creators, if they are live, that they're likely to get more people watching, and therefore that generates more income." And the police officer accepted that would be the case, and that concluded the day's evidence. It was a short day, but a packed day. Usually, then there would be a break for lunch, and the court would sit again in the afternoon. But in this case, the prosecution said that they would like to prepare for the following day, and that was the end of the day's evidence. So, as you can see, there's quite a lot was packed in to the morning. And then the case, as we know, was meant to last for 5 weeks. It's sitting in front of Mr. Justice Kinney with a jury, and it will resume then again tomorrow at 10:30.
It's a very technical case, Alison. What you're saying there as well, the prosecution is very meticulous with everything they're going through, even like sort of minute by minute, and there's no doubt about that. We have heard so far from the prosecution. When can we expect the defence? Do you know?
So the defence, we have already a glimpse, I think, today when it was discussed in an interview, how Stephen McCullagh had said Natalie was having problems with her ex-partner. The defence, I think, we're probably will not start until the end of this week, the start of next week, and then we will start to hear in more fulsome. Up until now, the defence have only questioned some of the prosecution witnesses and some of the police officers involved, but we haven't really heard their case. So it's difficult when you're trying to explain this as it go along because people are listening to evidence not out of context but in the manner in which it's presented. But there will be a defence put up for all the evidence that the prosecution has shown.
Alison Morris, thank you very much.